Well, we will go ahead and begin getting started here. Let me just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Matt Stevens Rich. I'm Projects Manager with Clean Fuels Ohio, and we designed today's webinar to feature Alliance Autogas's new system. It's a propane dual fuel system for Class 8 vehicles. So we'll start out just doing a general overview on propane fuel and how it can be used with vehicles, as well as a couple different considerations. Then we'll transfer things over to Ed Hoffman, who will be able to walk us through how the fuel system works and give us some considerations. And then I'll take it back over, go over some brief incentives and programs that are available in Ohio for vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles. And then we'll wrap things up with some questions from the audience. Once again, you can enter those questions in the question tab, which is on the GoToWebinar controls panel that you'll see on your right-hand side. So to start things off, let's go over some of the basics of propane and how it's able to work as a vehicle fuel. Now, propane is something that Clean Fuels Ohio focuses on. We are a U.S. Department of Energy designated Clean Cities Coalition, and we work across all alternative fuels to help promote those as a way to offset petroleum usage, to help reduce fuel costs and emissions for fleets in Ohio, both public and private and individual owners. So we work across all the different alternative fuels that are available. So the first thing that is most important to emphasize with using propane autogas as a vehicle fuel is the economical benefit it can provide to fleet owners and vehicle providers. It's very cost effective in terms of maintenance and fuel costs. Maintenance costs are oftentimes reduced as propane is a cleaner burning fuel than gasoline and diesel often, which allows for longer oil change cycles as well as less wear and tear on the engines. It is also cost effective in terms of price per gallon. Many of us right now are experiencing close to $2 per gallon gasoline prices, but propane actually has always been on a rather constant trajectory, hovering right around $2 at the highest range for availability, oftentimes less than $2, which is, even in these times of cheaper gasoline and diesel, still provides an economic benefit over those traditional fuels. And in terms of the refueling costs, that is installing refueling infrastructure, that actually is the least expensive option for any fuel that you'll be putting in a vehicle, gasoline or diesel included. This is often because the propane storage tank, the large cylinder, does not need to be buried into the ground, which helps reduce costs for infrastructure installation. And often, depending on the propane provider, they will be able to cover the cost of that refueling infrastructure installation, which means that that's just a cost that's offset for the fleet that would be using it. And there are indeed federal and state incentives available as well, which can help offset some of that capital costs of adoption. So this is a graph I often like to use just to help iterate that first point I made about how cost variable gasoline can be jumping up and then back down, whereas autogas over history has been more constant in its pricing and right now hovers right around that $2 mark. The second point to emphasize with propane autogas is it is a clean burning fuel. It's able to reduce carbon dioxide emissions as well as NOx and carbon monoxide emissions as well, for an overall greenhouse gas emission reduction of up to 17%. This is often the easiest way to think of it is propane carries fewer carbon molecules in it than diesel or gasoline. You can see the diesel and gasoline molecule diagram on the right-hand side of the slide, whereas propane, it's a smaller molecule, which means there's less carbon coming out of the tailpipe due to combustion. And also another thing to emphasize with propane is that it is a safe fuel. It is a low pressure fuel stored at around 100 to 300 psi in the tank. This pressure is what helps keep propane in its liquid state at room temperature. And that helps provide for better storage on board, but it also means that in the event of a rupture with the tank, which is very unlikely. The tanks are very sturdy and very strong, and built to a very specific specification. That if should that happen where there is a leakage, it would simply just come out of the tank and dissipate into the air, turn into a vapor. So there's actually no contamination. It would just simply go to the ground because it is heavier than air fuel and then dissipate naturally. It also carries a narrow ignition range, which means that if you were to be near a heat source, it would take a very specific ignition range to ignite, more specific than gasoline or diesel. And the tanks, as I mentioned before, are safer than gasoline or diesel. They're just simply built to a more specific standard, which provides for greater impact resistance and just real life wear and tear. And propane autogas is also domestically sourced. Oftentimes, estimations point to around 98% of propane is American made and produced. This taps back to gasoline and diesel. It oftentimes is imported into the United States. And so by using the domestically sourced fuel, you're able to help boost US made energy and also US jobs as well. In terms of where propane is seen as going, this graph here is just able to illustrate that there is a forecast for continued adoption of propane across the board in production, which is also shown in this graph, as well as just internal combustion engines that are running on propane and where that is seen going. And you'll see the line going forward. There will be an ever-increasing number of propane engines, but that also will include a growing number of on-road vehicles, and you'll also see that diesel injection in the top with the green, and this is getting at what Alliance Autogas is in turn working on with the diesel dual fuel application. And there are plenty of vehicle choices. Naturally, today's webinar is designed around talking about the Class 8 application, but it would be a remiss to not point out that anything from a lawn equipment all the way up now to Class 8, there are propane options available. Some popular instances where you'll see this applied is with school buses, as well as with utility trucks and vans. These are oftentimes very nice vehicles that run specific duty cycles that line up very well with running on propane. So just to get some of the verbiage down in terms of, I'm saying propane dual fuel, and just to explain what that is, you'll oftentimes hear of dedicated, bi-fuel, and dual fuel. And the difference between these is dedicated is the vehicle is running 100% of the time on propane. So it starts and runs on propane. Bi-fuel application is the ability to run on propane and gasoline, whereas you start in a gasoline, so the engine starts up in gasoline, and then once it's up to temperature, it will turn over to propane. And so in that case, the fuel is being switched right ahead of the engine and being fed along that way. And for dual fuel, which is what the Alliance Autogas application is, it's an ability to run on propane and diesel. And in this case, the fuels are being mixed together. So the engine will be running on diesel, and then at certain points, it will supplement up to 30% of the fuel going into the engine with propane, which allows both propane and diesel to be ignited together. And propane is a new technology in terms of how it's being delivered to the engine. It's using what's called liquid injection. This is the same concept as direct injection on a regular gasoline vehicle, whereas the fuel injector is built right into the cylinder and injecting straight into the engine. This is different than what was called the vapor system or vapor delivery, which was when we still were using carbureted engines. Back during the 80s, there was definitely a wave of propane vehicles hitting the market. And for vapor, it was a different system that did carry some kinks, specifically on startup. But gratefully, with the liquid injection, all those startup issues are resolved, and the engine is able to run much more optimally on propane as a fuel. In terms of fueling infrastructure options, propane is very customizable in terms of what a fleet is needing for application. Here are just a couple quick photos of different types of ways that you can have dispensers arranged as well as tanks arranged. Sometimes you can have the tank and the dispenser sitting right next to one another, or for a larger application, you can have the tank sitting a little bit further away with a more traditional gasoline kiosk, as it were, for dispensing the fuel. So some of the different options are containerized, where it's a turnkey solution. That is, it's a skid where the storage tank and dispenser are all shipped as one piece, and they're able to just drop right into place. You can do a customized application with a larger storage tank and multiple dispensers and other customizations as well as needed. Or there's also mobile fueling solutions, which is a propane delivery truck, sometimes called a bobtail, which has metering on it, and it's able to dispense propane autogas into the vehicles as needed. Sometimes you'll hear about this solution for school bus fleets, which are needing very specific hours of the day for refueling, such as early morning or late night. And sometimes a propane service will just distribute get one of their propane delivery trucks to the fleet, and they'll just be doing refueling on site via that. So oftentimes the containerized and customized options are what we see with fleets, but there are many options depending on what the refueling needs are for the fleet. And once again, as I mentioned at the beginning, installing a propane station is the least expensive alternative, even compared to gasoline or diesel stations. This is oftentimes just because installation is a cheaper process than with gasoline or diesel. There's no need to be burying the tanks, and in terms of what is needed for actually installing the propane refueling infrastructure is very low key and very low overhead. Oftentimes, what will happen is the propane distributor, depending on how much propane is expected to be used, they will be able to cover the costs of the propane station. So the only cost that will fall to fleets is running electricity to meet with the propane dispenser, and then also any safety precautions such as putting up guard railings around the station. So that's something that you can talk with a local propane distributor. They're more than happy to help walk you through some of this process. But the thing to emphasize is that it is a low-cost installation and equipment for getting deployed. Now, with that all being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the controls over to Ed Hoffman, who is going to share some details on the propane diesel displacement system that Alliance's Autogas is working. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and transfer controls over to Ed.
So the first slide here folks, is seriously just to go through and talk about what is out there available in the marketplace today for a Class 8 diesel-powered vehicle when it comes to an alternative fuel offering, whether it's propane, CNG, or other, what's out there you can buy today. Probably one of the most popular and notable offerings today is a natural gas dedicated fueled engine. This would be branded under the Westport Cummins name in most areas that you'd hear it out in the world. They're anywhere from 9 to as much as now 12-liter engines that are converted diesels that have an injection process to be able to take natural gas into that engine. Typically, we're looking at a $40,000 to $45,000 premium over its diesel counterpart. And of course, then we have to deal with range and with infrastructure requirements. The second option that's out there in the marketplace today would be blend systems that use natural gas and diesel. This technology actually is usually and currently available as they call it a single point fumigation system. So essentially what you have is a storage vessel of CNG, natural gas, methane, that travels under a high amount of pressure to the underhood area and is then put in at one point either before or after the turbo in the engine to allow for a blending of fuel. This technology has had difficulty adapting or being accepted into more modern engines due to the fact that single point introduction of that methane doesn't allow for a good contribution of that fuel to be timed properly with the combustion event in the engine. And what happens is a lot of valve overlap and such that actually the methane is actually released through the exhaust stacks. Those systems also could range anywhere from 25 to 45,000 miles. They do blend the fuel, they do work, but there's some significant challenges in being efficient with the fuel. What we offer, and what we're showing a picture here in this next slide actually, is a similar technology of blending fuels, but done in a slightly different manner. So what we do essentially is we modify the vehicle in a very non-intrusive manner, that we put a spacer plate in between the intake manifold and the engine itself. And very close to the combustion event, right there at the intake port, we inject propane to each cylinder individually. And how it's done actually is through monitoring the computer or the high-speed diagnostic line of the tractor. So instead of just listening to one sensor or having a fixed metering of the fuel, we're able to look at many characteristics of the vehicle and adjust an optimal blend of propane depending on engine RPM, engine load, and also have a lot of safety measures built in that there's any kind of engine fault going on, an overheat situation or overpressure situation, that we can isolate and shut this propane system down to not contribute or have any kind of negative ramifications that might occur with the engine already having a fault of its own. The nice parts about this system that we're gonna go to actually in a slide or two here is talking about, I guess, really what it does and what it doesn't do. The next slide actually, as we mentioned, is sort of the map of where this solution brings most benefits to the customer. So what we do is there's a fixed fuel table that's built into this technology that, depending on certain times and characteristics of that vehicle's operation, will inject propane and displace an equal amount of diesel. So if you look at this chart and go through it, on the bottom of the chart actually, and the percentages are engine load percentages. So this is a 10% engine load, and this is greater than 80% engine load. On the vertical axis actually are the actual displacement percentages. So as you see, actually between a 20 and 40% engine load, we can get nearly 40% average displacement of propane. Now, as we all know, unless you're in a steady state agricultural engine, vehicles and trucks in particular are never in a very consistent engine load demand or engine load category. So what happens is the vehicle is climbing up to speed, it's going to be in a higher engine load. As it's cruising on the highway, it's in an intermediate load. As it's coasting down the hill, it's in a low load. Anyway, there's a lot of different variants to the performance of this depending on how the vehicle, its drive and duty cycle. The good part about this is that most modern diesels have this information stored inside of its factory computer that can be very easily extracted and looked at. So in the proprietary software from Volvo or Cummins or from Detroit or other manufacturers, we can go in and look at a customer's existing diesel load characteristics and determine if they're a good candidate for this technology or not. If you notice, though, the areas that have the greatest displacement or would in return have the most limited return for a customer would be extremely high load situations, which means that if the vehicle is always pulling a hill or under-spec'd to a point where it's working harder than it should be, or at very low load situations. And there's really a pretty good reason of why this is set up that way, and we'll go into I guess the recipe here a little bit. At low engine loads, there's very little, and idle in particular, there's very little diesel fuel to actually displace. And if we were to start pulling diesel out and put in propane at low engine loads, we're actually going to run into situations where we're going to actually have some high emissions components and also start raising engine temperature parameters. Conversely, on the very high end side of the high load side of the distribution, we also don't really put a lot of propane in, and really that's for two reasons. One is actually that we like the idea that diesel at that point could do its work with its higher energy content than propane. And also, propane has a characteristic that it burns very quickly. And for some folks on the call that might go back in the day a little bit, propane actually has been sold in the past for diesel buyers as a power additive. If you were to inject propane into a diesel engine in an unmetered format, it has the opportunity to actually raise horsepower and torque limits significantly. So if we were to start metering propane at high engine loads, the risk is there that we'd be raising the horsepower and torque requirements of that vehicle to a point where you could contribute to driveline failure or other performance issues. So, one of the things that we're very cognizant of is, again, protecting that asset and protecting that engine and keeping our customers' vehicles reliable with maximum uptime. So we don't want to take any chances or put the vehicle in a position to fail. One of the things that's meant to note about this solution too is that it is a set calibration. So this is an EPA and California CARB approved solution, and part of that requires the fact that you can't have variations in the field or have drivers having input in how the system performs. You wouldn't want to all of a sudden turn the screw and start putting more propane in and then have a negative emissions profile, for example. And also cause engine damage. This is all actually done in a solid state piece of software and is a set calibration to that vehicle and to that engine serial number. So there's no driver interaction to try to get around the system to obtain more power or things such as that. So just another, quick notes, I guess. We talked earlier about some of the benefits of Autogas. Some of the additional benefits of this solution, there's no permanent modification to the engine done. So, not to get overly technical, but it's a very non-intrusive install. We use a spacer plate to induct propane. We use breakout wire harnesses to monitor and listen to signals from the vehicle. Other than putting a switch on the dashboard, it's about as intrusive as we get into the vehicle. So if customers do have certain trade or replacement cycles, the system can be removed and wouldn't have any kind of evidence or long-lasting repercussions to the customer. We don't change anything in regards to the original ECM or original fuel map of the vehicle. Essentially, we listen to the vehicle and what it's doing, and we adapt our technology to it. In the industry, the term is called the master-slave ECU configuration. So we don't have to go in and reflash a computer, or when the truck goes in for service, there's not an issue where a calibration could be lost. As mentioned before, propane is a power adder. In this case, we don't want to be. We want to get efficiency and we want to get emissions results. One of the questions always comes up is, we don't have any kind of range anxiety issues, because if the system does run out of propane or has a malfunction, we result back to its sole diesel operation. The diesel and the propane are stored separately on the vehicle. So what we need to do in the case of one of our conversions is actually add a propane storage vessel or a propane tank to the truck. There are many spaces and options of where that could happen. It could be done usually in place of an existing diesel tank if you have dual tanks and want to lose some weight and lose one. If there's clear frame on the vehicle, behind an existing fuel tank, we could mount it as long as we don't have interference for any type of heat sources or ground clearance issues. As a note to that, we're governed under the National Fire Protection Association codes of how we can and can't mount a tank, and we're very cognizant of that and what we do. One of the third options is that much like you'd see on a CNG vehicle, because you need so much storage to get range, we also have the ability actually to be able to mount a tank on the back rack or the rear frame of the vehicle in a horizontal or vertical status to be able to use behind the cab space for fuel storage for the customer also. So depending on the range and what the customer's needs are, we have the ability to custom spec a fuel tank for their needs to be able to match up very well to be able to have the base fuel, the propane solution. Our warranty on the system is 1 year, 100,000 miles. As a side note, that might not sound like a lot to some folks, but if you go out and buy a brand new Freightliner truck, that's your brand new factory warranty. So it actually is a pretty robust warranty actually in the truck aftermarket space. Again, our product will not violate your factory warranty. It is EPA approved, CARB approved, and we're also protected as an aftermarket part under the Magnuson-Moss Act. And quite the next and most important part is the organization that I represent is Blossman Services, which is part of Alliance Autogas. We're the training and support and the distributor of all these parts. We have field staff to help on the technical side. We have our own in-house warranty support, and where I'm sitting here today, about $4 million worth of parts sitting here to support customers' needs. So again, back to that uptime, getting that return once this investment is made. So at this point, just to recap, we talked about current market options that are out there for alternative fuels in Class 8. Most of those have always been around the CNG space. This is the first EPA and CARB approved propane option for a Class 8 vehicle. It differs greatly from those other blending technologies in the fact that it monitors the CAN line in a very complicated communication protocol of the vehicle. And the second great difference is that it actually does specifically meter the fuel at the point of intake, not fumigated. So the next area to talk about will be, emissions. I'm going to go, to be quite candid, when you just look at these graphs very quickly, you see on the left the diesel only component and the right the diesel blend component. This is based upon our EPA testing. You might look at those colors and say, wow, you guys are making a great emissions impact. Unfortunately, it isn't that intense. If you look at the scale of the numbers actually of the CO2 results and the particulate matter results, when you actually scale it out and look at it, it's a 4 to 5% gain in CO2, and particulate matter is already so low with a modern diesel that there is an improvement. It is measurable, but it's nothing that I think we can go to Greenpeace with and brag a lot about. The main pieces of this technology we're going to talk about next are the economic benefits. But it's important, I guess, to talk about the fact there is an emissions benefit, but it can be used as a sustainability piece. It can be used actually, for some marketing reasons. But if you want to get really, really dig deep into numbers, the actual carbon footprint piece of it, it's there. It's probably more pronounced if you're actually examining the full fuel cycle and looking at where your fuel is sourced from, domestic fuel versus foreign fuel. But I just like to be very candid when we show numbers to understand and to be able to scale them properly. So the biggest piece of this, I guess, is going to be the next area in talking about, I guess, the economics and what it means. This spreadsheet here in this model actually goes through and shows a Class 8 tractor traveling 100,000 miles a year, currently getting 6 miles per gallon on diesel, which is quite standard for an LTR, less than truckload carrier or other folks. We're showing a dollar differential in diesel. Your neck of the woods, when I pulled this a few weeks ago, actually a week or two ago, you were showing about $2.45 a gallon in diesel. I'm not sure if it's floated down a little bit now. It might have. But to guys give you an idea, whether it be for our light duty product or our heavy duty product, tax in right now, $1.45 a gallon for propane autogas is about right. We see a lot of published information in the fleet magazines and things sometimes that are based upon phone surveys. That information is not accurate. The cost of propane is typically a lot less than most folks expect. On the left-hand side, we're showing that percentage substitution, and I guess the key takeaways here are that even if you're only displacing 10% average diesel to propane, you're still going to be afforded today with a dollar differential, nearly a $1,700 a year savings in fuel costs. There's a documented savings for every drop of diesel we take out. And what happens is that substitution percentage is going to be dictated by the drive-in duty cycle of that vehicle. If you were to come to me and say, Ed, I want to install this onto a trash truck that stops and goes all day, we're going to be at a very low substitution, because if you think about it, you're at idle stop while you're loading, and then you're full throttle getting to that next stop. So you're basically at a 0 to 100% engine load back and forth all day. I'm not going to have many opportunities to be able to basically slip in this propane to give you that financial benefit. Conversely, if you're just sitting all day and idling, same idea, not going to be a benefit to you. The sweet spot and greatest fit for this actually is in your intermediate and cruise applications. This is going to be the greatest return. This 28 and 30% averages are going to be found in your distribution businesses, your less than truckload carriers going from terminal to terminal, and hub and spoke distribution strategies. That's where this is, and that's where you're going to see an ROI of under 2 years. The cost of the system, actually, if you want to do the math back here, I'm not sure if we even put it in here or not on the next slide or not, but it's under $10,000. It's right around $9,900 installed. So like you see, at a 28% displacement with $4,600 a year, you're probably about 25 months or so actually on your payback, which is quite better than you'll see in most CNG applications and in a lot of other areas with the more significant investment that's required. The last part of this actually we're going to talk about, I guess, is we have a customer testimonial piece. The customer actually wasn't able to join us here, but ironically, actually, this is part of a company I used to work for, so I can speak to it a little bit. But just want to go through and talk about real life, what numbers look like, or how the math is done on this. So this is actually a customer in Pennsylvania that has we did a round trip test actually to the Philadelphia area, about a 218-mile run. honestly, as you see here, being very openly disclosed, the vehicle actually had a tractor and a trailer, but it was unloaded. It weighed about 33,000 pounds, away from its possible 80,000 pounds. But I guess the point is here to talk about, I guess, is how the vehicle performed and what the numbers look like. So on that trip, in an unscientific, unweighed fuel situation, this is off a meter, the truck used 16 gallons of diesel and 13 gallons of propane. Which equates to about 7.5 miles per gallon on that vehicle. If you do the math and just do 13 to 16, it's about a 26% average substitution. The interesting thing was that when we actually pulled the information out of this truck's computer, out of its ECM, the truck didn't know the difference of whether it had propane or all diesel. It was nearly a 1-to-1 gallon exchange, and this is an interesting phenomenon because diesel is well over 200,000 BTUs. You would expect that when you put a gallon of propane in the place of a gallon of diesel, that you would see potentially a 60% reduction in the efficiency of the fuels because of its energy content. That does not happen with this technology. We've proven it now actually in lab testings, and then in examples like this, we've proven it in real life. There's actually a phenomenon that has been documented and can be looked at very easily, that using pilot injection, as the term is used, of propane and diesel, we actually increase the overall swirl and the overall combustion efficiency of the engine, the brake thermal efficiency, the BTE, as some scientists use it. So we do advertise and we do support the fact that when we take a gallon of diesel out, we nearly put a gallon of propane in. We have seen some variances depending on engine platforms. This is a Detroit diesel in this example, and Volvo actually was about a 15% degradation. So this varied by manufacturer and probably some of their combustion techniques and designs, but it is not the 60% degradation that one would expect from a pure energy content. That's probably the important piece here. Next slide actually is because the customer wasn't here. This is actually off a press release that we did that could be looked up, but essentially it was actually this customer talking about how the vehicle performed. They ran this vehicle, had about 60,000 miles on it. Overall, actually, with all the things we've done to this vehicle, obviously there's no check engine lights. It's working properly. Drivers like it. There's no difference in drivability. They're claiming they've had some times of up to a 50% substitution depending on the load and how the vehicle was used. So again, just to go through and just give a little bit of credibility behind what we're doing, it's not just us talking, but we have some customers that are able to go out and experience this technology and tell us how it works.
My name is Ed Hoffman. I'm the president of Blossman Services. Blossman Services is the EPA manufacturer of record for Alliance Engineered Fuel Systems. Our company specializes in the adaptation of propane autogas for the use on both on-road and off-road engine technologies.
My name is Brent Kiemel, and I'm an application engineer with Alliance Autogas. And what I do is help develop some of our propane autogas conversion system technology and walk it through the emissions conformity testing as well.
Diesel displacement technology is a cutting-edge adaptation of our same fuel for Class 8 road tractors. What we're able to do actually is, by substituting clean propane autogas in the place of diesel, is offer customers reduced operating costs, improved emissions, and better efficiencies in regards to obtaining sustainability initiatives.
So our diesel displacement technology works by first gathering key engine information from the vehicle's onboard computer. It then uses that information to calculate how much propane and when to inject that propane into the engine. It's kind of key to remember that while the vehicle is displacing or injecting propane, it's displacing diesel. So it's removing up to 30% of the diesel in the engine and replacing it with the equivalent amount of propane. During that time, there's actually a differential from about $1.30 between propane and diesel fuel. So there's a cost savings per mile.
We offer a solution that we can reduce your fuel costs by as much as 7 cents per mile, even with today's compressed fuel prices. We offer very, very well documented impact to your EBITDA line. We could actually improve your operating ratios and be able to put you in a better position to be competitive in today's very difficult marketplace.
Really, with the cost savings and the drivability, it ends up being a system that the driver doesn't feel any difference in. You can turn the system on and off and you don't feel any jolts or any system changes in how the vehicle operates. Besides being EPA and CARB approved, connects to the CAN bus of the vehicle, which is important to note because It gets a lot of information from the vehicle's onboard electronics. A lot of other systems don't do that, so they're unable to monitor things such as fault codes. If there's a fault code in the vehicle, the system will automatically shut down, revert back to diesel, and prevent any damage from happening.
We're very proud to announce this is the first EPA and CARB approved diesel displacement system on the marketplace. There are other product offerings that have brought in the past that have no documentation or the ability to prove a return. Through the investment we've made into this technology and the dedication of our engineering staff, we're proud to bring a very tangible, deliverable product to the marketplace.
A few of the reasons why this system is superior to other systems available on the market is because 1, it displaces or removes diesel in the engine and replaces that with propane. 2, it is cleaner burning, thus it is also EPA and soon to be CARB compliant, and it also offers performance benefits for the driver. He doesn't see a difference in power or torque or any drivability.
If you're a fleet that's looking for a competitive advantage, an emissions reduction, or a cutting-edge way to be able to satisfy a sustainability initiative, this will be the most economic and beneficial solution for your needs. So to learn more about this technology and to help us walk you through this process, please join us at allianceautogas.com.
Before I pass it back, again, just to recap, this is a new piece of technology. We actually have a fleet in Ohio right now that is running a pilot with us right now, actually in Worcester. Those folks are very well accepting of the fuel. They feel very proud and very good the fact that the shale fields in your neck of the woods are a great source of where this gas is coming from, and they're able to support their local community. So at that, I'm going to pass it back. I thank you for your attention and look forward to some questions.
Thanks for that, Ed. Appreciate your giving insight to how the system works. I'm just going to wrap things up with going over some of the different incentives that are available here in the state of Ohio. But by all means, if you're tuning in from an outside state, still feel free to get in contact with us, and we can connect you with either your local clean cities or others who would be able to help share on some available incentives in your neck of the woods. So just to give some overview, Clean Fuels Ohio, we are able to help out fleets with grant writing support, as well as doing any fleet analysis that may be required. So just to give a brief overview of what is currently available, the biggest one is called the Ohio EPA Diesel Emission Reduction Grant. This is a grant that is expected to be issued sometime this month or early October, and currently slated to around $20 million to be expected for the release. That would be in 2 phases of announcement. But what the Ohio Diesel Emission Reduction Grant, or DERG, applies towards is diesel vehicle retrofits, engine repowers, and replacements. So this is anything that's able to help reduce diesel emissions. Just to go into a little bit more detail on how this grant is eligible, you must be able to operate in a non-attainment county for 65% or more of the time. Those non-attainment counties are highlighted here in green. So any fleets that operate for majority of their routes in any of these green county areas, you'll notice non-attainment counties are low air quality counties, so that includes many of the metro areas. One thing to emphasize is operating doesn't necessarily mean location. We did actually work with one fleet which worked in Southeast Ohio, and so that was right around here, but they ran most of their routes going down 71 towards Cincinnati. So even though they were located outside of a non-attainment county, their route still ran across non-attainment counties, which meant that they were still eligible. This grant is eligible for any diesel vehicles across public or private fleets, school bus, refuse, and mass transit, at least during the last release of the grant, are eligible for up to 80% of the total cost of a new vehicle for replacement. And government fleets and private fleets are eligible for up to 80% of the incremental cost. That is the difference of cost between the alternative fuel or cleaner diesel technology and whatever would be the traditional or regular vehicle. So that's something that we're more than happy to talk more through with interested fleets, especially with announcement anticipated to come shortly. So feel free to get in touch with us and we can talk you more through some of those different specifications. But again, we did work with over 15 partners in fiscal year 2013, the last time that DIRG was announced, and we were able to have a number of different types of technologies funded. So it was a very successful grant application, and we're excited for this next round to come as well. And this is just a brief overview as well. In the past, we have had grant funding to cover our grant writing costs for fleets. Unfortunately, we don't have that this next go around, but we are able to talk through different ways that we can structure into the grant writing for covering our personnel costs for writing the grant. Another thing to also cover is the Alternative Fuel Transportation Loan Program. This is a program that has been around for a number of years. It's still awaiting final rulemaking on the agency side, but what it's able to provide is a loan program for improvement of air quality, which would focus on investing in nonprofit organizations, businesses, school districts, and local governments for purchasing and installing alternative fuel technology or also refueling and blending. So this is a program which is able to really fit in well with many fleets around the state, and we're happy to also talk more through that. And then also just a legislative update. Many of you were familiar with House Bill 336, which was the Alternative Fuels Incentives Bill that was making the rounds during the last legislative session. While it unfortunately did not see passage, it is being essentially reincarnated, copied over into House Bill 176. And many of our stakeholders and members were involved with spreading the word on House Bill 176 and the benefit it's able to provide. Just giving a brief overview, there's a public, well, first and foremost, it's a fuel technology or a fuel neutral bill. So that means it's able to cover many of the alternative fuels that are available. So it focuses on both public and private incentives. Public entity grants, which you see at the top. This is a maximum grant award of $500,000 per entity that would focus on funding of alternative fuel vehicles. And then also the private business tax credits, which would be a tax credit for the purchase or conversion of an alternative fuel vehicle. And that's in the amount of 50% of the cost of conversion or purchase price, with some more stipulations to it. And then also included is a gaseous fuel tax. At present, there is no state level gas tax on compressed natural gas. So that is also built in to this legislation as well, to have that be a phase in as well. So in many ways, this legislation is focused on creating some of that necessary basic framework for alternative fuel vehicles and incentivizing their use in the state. And then in Clean Fuels Ohio, we also run what's called the Ohio Green Fleets program. This is just a simple program that we have created over the years to help recognize those fleets that are leading the way in alternative fuel adoption and emission reduction. We're actually just about to unveil our next round of Ohio Green Fleets at the Midwest Green Fleets Forum and Expo. But if you are interested in getting more information on how you can enroll as an Ohio Green Fleet, give our office a call and we can provide you with the forms and just give you the brief overview of what it takes for metric in recognition. And so, as I mentioned, we have the Midwest Green Fleets Forum and Expo coming up at the end of this month. This is a 2-day conference that we're going to be co-presenting with 100 Best Fleets and MEMA, which is the Municipal Equipment Maintenance Association. Again, it's going to be September 23rd and 24th at the Hyatt Regency downtown. We're going to be right in the convention center with hosting it. And we really have focused on trying to emphasize this conference as being fleet focused. So we've been able to really pack in a lot of great sessions and event features. This is a very brief rundown of the agenda. You'll see that sessions are focused anywhere from just general fleet perspective to also 101 on fleet analysis and planning. What type of specifications should you anticipate for an alternative fuel vehicle? And also shop specifications, something that can sometimes be overlooked. At what does it take to properly spec a maintenance shop to work with propane or other alternative fuels? There will also be an event feature ranging from just a general vendor expo and vehicle ride and drive, at which we're going to have plenty of alternative fuel vehicles available for testing. We also will have the Ohio Green Fleets Awards. Like I mentioned the slide before, we'll be announcing our upcoming Ohio Green Fleets during that time, as well as 100 Best Fleets will be there, and they will be doing their own programming. And also, there will be some site tours also built into it. One tour at Honda Marysville Manufacturing up in Marysville, Ohio, as well as the Parker Hydraulic Hybrid System facility tour as well. And then you can also see our guest speakers. We really wanted to emphasize having a range of speakers from public fleet managers, some private fleet managers, and also those from university and from Department of Energy. So really is a very well-scoped program for attendees. And we do also want to emphasize those that are in attendance on this webinar today for trying to give you a good deal on registration. So we actually are able to offer you if you register with Green Fleets, the promo code that you see at the bottom there, it will only be a $30 ticket for the conference. So a very good deal. You can get all the details on the Midwest Green Fleets Forum and Expo at midwestgreenfleets.com. And that wraps it up for all of our presentations. We do have a couple questions which have come through here. So let me unmute Ed and Rodney here, and we can go through some of those presentations.
Yeah, two questions that came up. One was actually our demonstrations available. Quick, simple answer: yes. This is new technology and something that you wouldn't want to buy without touching and feeling it first. So we actually do have a demo tractor that's traveling the country that we could probably get up to your neck of the woods easily to be able to be evaluated. Additionally, we're very open actually to doing fleet demonstrations. So if we have a qualified candidate, with a nice size fleet that's looking at this technology, we could definitely do a pilot or demo program, sort of a try it before you buy it type of thing. So that's definitely an option for us. The second question actually that came up was, is this fuel system able to be retrofitted, or does it need to be purchased new? This is primarily marketed actually as a retrofit product. This is something that we install in the field. We train local folks to support, and it is primarily an aftermarket product. So this is a retrofit, not a new product primarily. And that was 2 questions.
And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, you can type any questions into the question bar on the right-hand side. Another question too, actually, for you, Ed, while we're waiting for folks to write in any questions that they may have, in terms of you had great discussion about how stop and go traffic isn't going to be the best fit for the technology, nor is idling all day. What is the process for determining if that fleet is going to be a good fit? What does that look like for someone interested that wants to check out if the technology would work?
Yeah, what we do is actually, and Rodney Johnson's on the call. He covers us for Ohio. Rodney and one of our technical folks would basically go and visit the customer. It's a very consultative sales process. We want to come in and learn about your operation and how your fleet is used. And part of that evaluation would actually involve us then actually looking at some of your vehicles and extracting some ECM data. Or if you currently have a telematics solution, many of those already have that information in there through some very simple reports. So yeah, part of our evaluation and question and answering will be learning about your drive cycle and then actually studying your vehicle and understanding how it's used. And then we come back to you with a solution saying, this is what we expect your return would be, or this isn't a fit, or this is a great fit. We don't want to be in a situation where we put this on a vehicle that's not going to work and benefit the customer.
And in terms of those that are currently using it, you had a great illustration of just a test case, driving a route along the East Coast. What has been the most popular feedback that you've seen with deployment in the field?
Essentially, the most popular feedback is that there's really not much feedback, which means that the drivers are accepting it. I mean, there's a slight hurdle of behavioral change with putting the fuel in the vehicle that needs to be done. But from a drivability standpoint, other than seeing another gauge on the vehicle, the driver doesn't really have any really feedback or of it, which is probably the best accompaniment of it. Besides that, I mean, I think you're going to see it in your fuel bill. I mean, at that area. I mean, if you're tracking just your diesel fuel mileage, you're going to see a substantial improvement in the vehicles that uses technology. I guess, it's terrible to say, but no news is sort of good news.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we don't have any other questions coming in, but definitely afterwards we are going to be distributing out the video for this presentation and also be able to share information that was presented here today. By all means, if you do have any interest in any of this information, we'll be able to share contact information and as well as the slide content that was shown here today. So thank you everyone for attending, and also, if you have any interest in Midwest Green Fleets, we definitely welcome all those to attend. So thank you again for attending, and we'll be ending the webinar here.